In the fearsome frontline kill zones of the Russia-Ukraine war, information is everything. The more you know about your enemy's location and movement, the more power you have. The challenging part is actually obtaining that information. But what if you had a way to make your opponent literally reveal their exact positions without even realizing what they were doing? That's exactly what some genius Ukraine hackers have managed to do, and this is how. It all boils down to one specific piece of technology: Starlink, the satellite internet service operated by Elon Musk's SpaceX. Starlink has played a huge role over the course of the entire conflict, having been used as far back as February 2022 to replace internet and communication networks in Ukraine that have been damaged or destroyed by the Russians. In the years since then, Ukrainian civilians, government, and military forces have all made use of this service. Civilians in war-torn areas have relied on the service to contact the outside world or keep in touch with family and friends, for example, while the likes of schools, hospitals, and even the trains of Ukrainian railways have also harnessed the powers of Starlink satellites to provide vital services for the population. Meanwhile, despite protestations from both Musk and SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have also found ways to harness Starlink's capabilities to help them defend their territory and carry out counterattacks against the invaders. It's been called the essential backbone of communication on Ukraine's battlefields, with many units having at least one Starlink terminal to help them stay connected and gather vital data. Drone crews also found ways to use Starlink to help pilot their unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, in attacks on Russian forces, with some drones even equipped with their own Starlink terminals too. Russia, meanwhile, has been prohibited from officially using Starlink within its own borders, with SpaceX restricting access through a technique called geofencing, which essentially involves limiting the availability of the service to specific areas. However, maintaining those restrictions in contested and occupied parts of Ukraine has proven far more difficult, with Russian forces reportedly able to use smuggled terminals in some frontline regions. For the early stages of the war, this meant that Ukraine had an enormous advantage in terms of connectivity and communications. But as time went by, things started to change. In early 2024, for instance, Ukraine's defense intelligence revealed that Russian forces were using Starlink satellite communications. In fact, Ukrainian troops reported that the Russians had been using Starlink for quite a long time, with thousands of terminals in their possession. No one was sure exactly how this had happened. SpaceX confirmed that it hadn't sold any terminals to Russia either directly or indirectly. It added that it didn't do any business with the Russian government or its military, and Starlink confirmed that its service was not functional in Russia. The company also threatened to sanction or deactivate any third parties found to have supplied Starlink products to Russian forces. So, Ukraine's intelligence agents dug a little deeper. They found and released a radio intercept of Russians discussing the possibility of buying Starlink terminals through an Arab nation. In the meantime, more evidence emerged of Starlink usage among the Russian army. While the terminals didn't work within Russia itself, they were functional in frontline areas, and that presented a major dilemma for Ukraine and SpaceX itself. If the company continued to allow Starlink to work in these locations, then both sides would be able to benefit, and the Russians could use their illegally obtained terminals to orchestrate attacks on Ukrainian positions. At the same time, if SpaceX decided to expand its geofencing measures to stop Starlink use by Russian forces at frontline locations, then that might also interfere with Ukrainian access and communications too. Ukrainian teams, therefore, offered to team up with Starlink engineers to work out a way to disable the service for Russian users without impacting Ukraine. In May 2024, it seemed as though the story had reached a positive conclusion. The Pentagon and SpaceX announced that Russian use of Starlink satellites had been officially blocked. However, John Plum, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy at the US Department of Defense, warned that Russia might still find ways to work around the block. At this time, we have successfully countered Russian use, but I'm certain Russia will continue to try and find ways to exploit Starlink and other commercial communication systems. It will continue to be a problem. I think we wrapped our heads around it and found good solutions with both Starlink and Ukraine. Plum was right. Mere months after the Pentagon's announcement, more evidence emerged from Ukraine of Russia using drones fitted with Starlink systems, and it seemed that the problem would never go away. In fact, in 2024, it only got worse. Evidence showed that tens of thousands of Starlink satellite receivers were still being smuggled into Russia via various nations, including Turkey, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Once they made their way to the front lines, those same receivers made life a lot easier for Russian troops and their commanding officers. They could use them to extend the range of their attack drones, while also making them more precise and harder to jam with electronic warfare countermeasures. This in turn made them more effective and deadly. Russian officers also leveraged Starlink satellite internet to enjoy real-time battlefield mapping with up-to-date information about troop positions and terrain imagery, so they could more easily and efficiently coordinate their soldiers and resources. A Ukrainian cyber warfare expert codenamed Goldfinger summed up the situation to reporters. Since 2025, they started to use Starlinks to control their big drones and give a higher precision for the attacks, give them an advantage to bypass our anti-drone systems. So it was becoming more important and dangerous for us. The situation was looking increasingly grim. By early February 2026, Ukraine was reeling after a long-lasting and particularly intense bombing campaign from the Russians, combined with the crippling effects of a long and cold winter, with recurring blackouts as the Kremlin's drone swarms targeted substations and energy facilities across the country. Yaro, an intelligence officer with Ukraine's 128th Heavy Mechanized Brigade, admitted that his country's prospects at the time weren't the brightest. The enemy was attempting to infiltrate their units through indirect assault operations, particularly by exploiting poor weather, to move their infantry between our positions and continue their advance. He and his brigade were attempting to fend off Russian assaults not far from Zaporizhia city in southeastern Ukraine at the time. Further to the east, Russian forces were also gradually advancing towards the city of Ulaypola, while Ukrainian defenders were being pushed back in places like Pokrovsk, Liman, and elsewhere. Then SpaceX did something that turned the whole situation upside down. Kyiv appealed to the company to introduce a new registration requirement for any Starlink terminal being used in Ukraine. It agreed and quickly implemented the new system. All of a sudden, anyone wanting to access Starlink services anywhere in Ukraine, including occupied territories and frontline locations, had to visit an authorized service center in unoccupied territories and present their passport. If they didn't do that, their devices simply wouldn't work. For Ukraine, it was a major victory and a hugely important turning point. For Russia, it was a catastrophe. In an instant, countless troops, units, and commanders were blinded, and even Russian officials were forced to admit that this move had dramatically impacted their operations. Andrei Medvedev, for example, the deputy chairman of the Moscow City Duma, took to Telegram to say that, as a result of SpaceX's actions, instead of a planned strike against the enemy, we have a hellish mess. Russian military bloggers also raged about the decision online, like Alexander Sladkov, who admitted that the loss of Starlink access certainly creates significant difficulties, and the Two Majors Telegram channel, which wrote, "The fascist beloved by millions, Elon Musk, serves the interests of the armed forces of Ukraine. This may explain the massive failure of terminals that began yesterday evening on the front. In this way, the genius adored by liberals once again assisted the armed forces of Ukraine in killing our soldiers." Other military bloggers noted that Russia was trying to work around the issue, but had no viable alternative to Starlink for the time being. They added that the Kremlin was looking at options like techniques to bypass the registration process or a shift towards using Chinese satellites, but confirmed that it would take quite some time for any of those prospective solutions to come to fruition. But time is a precious commodity for Russian troops on the front lines. Most of them only last a matter of days in the kill zones before being either wounded or worse, and they couldn't afford to wait around for the authorities to figure out a way to fix this issue. So they got desperate, and a group of Ukrainian hackers took full advantage of that desperation. Now, quick side note, this is why we make the military show, to explain how power really moves. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Now, some Russians realized that the only way to get Starlink service back was to find a way to register their terminals. They couldn't do it themselves, as that would involve going deep into Ukrainian territory and somehow obtaining Ukrainian passports. It was far too risky. So they started seeking out Ukrainians who might be willing to help them. They offered large sums of money to anyone who would register the terminals on their behalf, restoring their communications. It was a desperate move, But for the troops on the ground, it was the only option they had left. What they didn't realize, however, was that their appeals had caught the attention of the 256 Cyber Assault Division, a team of Ukrainian cyber warfare specialists led by Goldfinger himself, a former soldier who was wounded in battle but decided to continue serving his country in the digital realm as a hacker. The division sensed that this was an opportunity for them to set a trap for the Russians that could change the course of the war and save countless lives in the process. They decided to pose as a group of cyber criminals and began reaching out to desperate Russian troops, effectively offering to register their Starlink receivers for them in Ukraine in exchange for a cryptocurrency payment. Once someone had taken the bait, the scam began. The Ukrainian hackers lured their victims deeper and deeper into the trap, first asking them to provide some mundane pieces of information, such as the serial numbers of their devices. This all seemed normal and not particularly risky to the Russians, so they went ahead and submitted their details. Then the hackers went further, asking for additional info. Eventually, once they had actually received payment from the Russians for their services, they moved on to the final stage of their scheme, asking the soldiers for their exact GPS coordinates. By this point, many Russian soldiers were already all in on the idea. They'd paid and given away plenty of information already, so they acquiesced to the request, willfully providing pinpoint data about their locations. From there, all the hackers had to do was pass that information on to Ukrainian military units fighting on the front lines, who could then sneak and destroy the Russians with ease. It's an outrageous trick, but it works. The 256 division reports that more than 2,600 Russians have fallen headfirst into the trap and given up their whereabouts. This in turn has helped Ukraine's military to find out the exact coordinates of Russian command posts, drone pilot positions, troop concentrations, and headquarters. Investigative journalist Maxim Tucker, who had made an entire documentary about these genius Ukrainian hackers, provided additional data about how their scam works during an episode of the Times Radio Frontline podcast. He explained that the team is made up of just 6 people, but they were able to design an AI chatbot that does most of the work for them, reaching out to Russians and gathering their data one piece at a time. This allows them to target huge numbers of enemy forces, despite being a relatively small group. He added that the hackers also operate in other ways, using various cyber techniques to break into Russian email accounts or using fake AI-generated female profiles to chat with Russian frontline troops and persuade them to reveal valuable details about their positions and movements. It all helps to build up Ukraine's library of intelligence and paint a clearer picture of the battlefield. As soon as the hackers find out anything important, they pass it on to military command centers. Tucker even filmed the very moment a call came through to a command post from Goldfinger himself, revealing that a Russian soldier was hiding out nearby. He explains that when Ukraine's teams receive this kind of information, they don't simply send out drones right away or bomb those areas without verification. They don't want to run the risk of harming civilians or wasting resources, so they first carry out surveillance to confirm that the Russians are really there before planning their next steps. In his article for The Times, Tucker cites an example in which Yarrow of the 128th Heavy Mechanized Brigade received coordinates from the 256 Division and maps them onto reconnaissance imagery, zooming in to examine the exact area where Russians are believed to be based. He soon spots the telltale signs of enemy troops, including fresh tracks and stacks of branches camouflaging their shelter. Once Yarrow confirmed the intel, he passed the coordinates to the next link in the chain, Ukrainian drone operators, who then conduct a precision strike on the shelter. Yarrow and his fellow officers watch the live feed unfold as a kamikaze drone collides with the structure's roof, bringing the whole shelter down around the Russians huddled up inside. Moments before impact, the drone's camera spots something else, a satellite dish on the building's roof, not pointing at the sky, but towards a nearby village. This too has become a common sight throughout frontline locations. Once SpaceX severed Starlink service, Russians started to use satellite dishes to create Wi-Fi bridges between units to allow them to communicate. On the one hand, it's an innovative way to work around the problem. On the other hand, it also makes it even easier for Ukraine to work out where the Russians are hiding. They simply have to look for the satellite dishes, see which way they're pointing, and follow the lines to find more troops. Yarrow added that even after giving away their location data to the hackers, many Russians remained in the same position, at least for a little while, giving Ukraine time to find and eliminate them. There are a few possible explanations for this. It may be, for example, that some Russian soldiers are simply too foolish to realize that they've been tricked, Alternatively, they might understand that they're being scammed but are too afraid to admit to their superiors or fellow squad mates, so they stay silent and hope that their mistake won't prove fatal. In some cases, Russians may want to relocate, but simply aren't able to do so because they're based in such dangerous locations, with Ukrainian drones buzzing overhead, scouring the scene for any signs of movement. As a result, many of these troops are being wiped out, all because of their own naivety, which has made life a lot easier for Ukrainian drone operators. Operators like Katerina, aged 23 and 4 months pregnant at the time Tucker met with her. She decided to sign up for military service after witnessing the horrors inflicted by Russian occupiers in her own village during the first year of the war. My fellow villagers suffered during occupation. Some of the men were taken prisoner, one was tortured to death. They threw grenades into basements where people were hiding, too terrified to come out. Some people died as a result. Now, she's one of many drone pilots who use data obtained by the hackers to take out Kremlin soldiers, slowing the enemy's advances and weakening its military machine, one strike at a time. I just feel a thirst for revenge for everything they've done here and are doing. I'm protecting my sisters, brothers, little nephews, and in fact all the children in Ukraine who are suffering from Russian aggression, and I'm doing this so that my children can live in peace later on. So, how effective has this method been? Well, while Tucker acknowledges that it's impossible to calculate the exact numbers of Russian casualties caused by this operation, Ukraine's frontline fighters have definitely felt its effects. They reveal that Russian strikes on Ukrainian lines have fallen by an astonishing 45% since Starlink terminals were shut down and the hacking began. Tucker suggests that countless lives have been saved as a result, and other cyber brigades elsewhere along the front lines have learned a lot from the 256 Division. Some have even started emulating their methods to gather even more Starlink data and conduct even more devastating attacks against their enemies. Of course, it's unlikely that this method will work forever. The Russians will eventually realize what's happening, and fewer troops will be willing to give away their location data. But Ukraine's hackers are persistent. They're already working on new tricks and techniques to catch the enemy off guard, and they're beginning to lean more heavily on AI technologies like AI personas or AI-designed hacking tools to power up their operations. This has helped them break into email inboxes of Kremlin officials and Moscow businessmen, as well as uncover the classified locations of Russian arms factories, which have since been struck with long-range missiles. In short, while these cyber teams may not be out there on the front lines firing rifles or organizing artillery strikes, they're still having an extraordinary impact on this war, using innovative out-of-the-box thinking to spread chaos, confusion, and collapse among the Kremlin's ranks. And the latest intelligence shows that Russia's collapse is far greater than anyone anticipated, which you can learn more about in this video. Alternatively, check out this video to see how even hardcore Russian nationalists and former loyalists are turning against the country's president, Vladimir Putin. And for more military news, insights, and analysis, subscribe to The Military Show today.